Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation and Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 5th, 2020. It's 2020. It is a new year, first show of a new year. And boy, do we have a show planned for you. Have you been paying attention to what this idiot, Donald John Trump, has done with the airstrikes in Iraq, which killed Qassem Soleimani, who was an Iranian general, and all hell is broken loose. We have an update also, a breaking news story as well. Washington Post, TheHill.com report that Trump threatens very big sanctions if Iraq forces out U.S. troops. So, you know, I had an entire show planned before this strike happened Thursday night. So what we're going to do, we're going to deal with some of this in the first hour. Trump ordered U.S. airstrike killing top Iranian general Qassem Soleimani at Baghdad airport. Also, Iran threatens retaliation. Iran is pulling out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. It's a whole lot of fallout from this. Many people are asking, what is Trump's strategy? He did not consult with Congress before this strike. He did let people, his visitors at Mar-a-Lago, know about it. He did let Senator Lindsey Graham, who is not part of the Gang of Eight, not part of congressional leadership, he let Lindsey Graham know about it because Lindsey Graham was at Mar-a-Lago, the quote-unquote Southern White House. And Trump let Israel know about this strike before it happened. So it's very, very strange timing. Some people are suspecting, well, does this have to do anything with the impending trial, his impeachment trial in the U.S. Senate? Is he trying to interrupt that? Is he trying to distract away from that? People are bringing up 1998 when just minutes before when Bill Clinton was about to be impeached in the U.S. Senate. He launched an attack as well on Morning Joe Friday morning. They talked about that this past Friday. So it's a lot going on. Now, so what I'm going to do, we're going to deal with some of this here, and then we're going to look at some history. Because with all this taking place, and keep in mind, I warned you in 2016 before the election that Donald Trump did not have the temperament to be president. And remember, Michelle Obama told you that the presidency does not change who you are. The presidency reveals who you are, right? Now, previous presidents had a chance to take out Soleimani, but they did it because of the repercussions that they knew would take place. Iran is threatening to attack the U.S. Iran is threatening to retaliate. Okay, so we're going to deal with the best I can in this first hour. We're going to deal with some of this, and then I'll probably do some broadcasts throughout the week. Follow me on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, because I've been sharing these breaking news stories dealing with this, okay, more than I can just deal with in these 2 hours here. Follow me on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, my personal page, Michael Imhotep, because I warned you in 2020 before the election about Donald Trump. And people were talking about, oh, we're going to have a better economy, things like this. What is a better economy if World War III starts? I'm just asking. What's a better economy if World War III starts? But anyway, this is what you wanted. Okay. So, in 1953, so because of this, other articles have been circulating around. National Public Radio has an article that we shared a couple of days ago that deals with, in 1953, the CIA overthrew Iran's democracy in 4 days. We're going to talk about that, talk about what happened. A lot of people don't know that history. Then also the history of the Iran hostage crisis from 1979 has resurfaced as well, because Trump threatens to attack 52 Iranian locations, okay, if Iran retaliates against the U.S., and 52 was the number of hostages, U.S. hostages, who were captured in the Iran hostage crisis. Okay? So, History.com has a good article, and I'll share some of it with you. I don't know how much I'll be able to get through it. But History.com has a good article that has resurfaced as well. They just posted this yesterday on their Facebook fan page. U.S.-Iran tensions from the hostage crisis to sanctions to drone strikes. U.S.-Iran tensions from the hostage crisis to sanctions to drone strikes, right? So all this is taking place at the same time. It's been a crazy 72 plus hours. So we'll talk some about that, and then we'll get to what I had planned for you before this idiot did this. Okay? There's a new movie coming to Netflix that deals with Madam C.J. Walker. And this movie unveils, this movie tells it's in 4 parts. And it talks about a self-made African-American woman, Madam C.J. Walker. It's scheduled to debut March 20th, 2020. It stars Octavia Butler as Madam C.J. Walker. It co-stars Blair Underwood as her husband, C.J. Walker. And this is where she got the C.J. Walker from, because that was his name. Her birth name was Sarah Breedlove. Okay? So we'll talk some about that in our second hour. And then we know that this is the new year, so Happy New Year to everybody.
Yep.
And we know that as an African-American tradition, now I don't know if a lot of white people do this, so maybe you can let me know. White people who listen to the show, maybe you can let me know, I don't know. But I know a lot of African-Americans eat black-eyed peas on New Year's Day, right? That's a tradition. I remember when I was a kid, we would do that. And I didn't know why we did it. But my mother cooked black-eyed peas and said, "You're going to eat these, okay?" This was before the group Black-Eyed Peas even became popular, right? We would do this. So, but this ties into African history. So the Columbus Dispatch has an article dealing with black-eyed peas, black-eyed peas reach deep into African-American tradition. So this talks about some of that history, and then that caused me to do some further research. And we find out that black-eyed peas come from Africa, right? So I came across some other articles that dealt with African foods that we thought were American. They're really African foods, but we thought they were American foods. Okay, so we'll talk some about that in the second hour. Now, Kwanzaa just passed, and I was at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History for Kwanzaa. Many of you all came down there. You saw my Kwanzaa presentation I did Friday, December 27th, 2019. I was a keynote speaker for the second day of Kwanzaa, Kuji Chagalia. This past Sunday, I played a clip of that on our show here. But each year in Brooklyn, New York, and the New York area, they have what's called a Kwanzaa Crawl. A Kwanzaa Crawl. And this was spearheaded by a comedian there. I forgot her name. I've talked about this a number of times. Khaled is her last name. But this Kwanzaa Crawl combines the concept of a cash mob. It combines the concept of a cash mob with Kwanzaa to make Kwanzaa cool again and to educate millennials about Kwanzaa, African American history, African culture, the black pride, etc., but also support African American owned businesses. So blackenterprise.com has a really good article about this Kwanzaa Crawl that took place. They do it the first day of Kwanzaa, which is always December 26th, and the first principle of Kwanzaa is unity. And this Kwanzaa Crawl recycled $250,000 to African American owned businesses. Now, this is something that we should do across the country. Okay? This is something we should do across the country. All right, so we'll talk some about that. Black Enterprise is a good article about that. And then January 1st was the anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay? And President Abraham Lincoln, January 1st, 1863, issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. So History.com had an article about this, Equal Justice Initiative, EJI.org, etc. Brian Stevenson's organization, they had an article about this as well. So we'll talk some about that and why the Emancipation Proclamation did not free the enslaved Africans. Because unfortunately, many of us still think the Emancipation Proclamation freed the enslaved Africans. This is during the U.S. Civil War. No, it did not. All right, so we'll deal with that, and that's about it. That's all the time we're going to have, because I got to deal with this story because of this idiot. Remember, The presidency doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. And then tweets resurfaced of Donald Trump in 2011, 2012, saying that President Barack Obama, the only way he could be reelected is if he did what? Started a war with Iran. Imagine that. There's always a tweet for this idiot. There's always a tweet. Now, you remember Nancy Pelosi said that Trump was going to self-impeach. And nobody had heard that term before this jackass. We didn't know what self-impeach was, but we're looking at it right now. Okay, I'm telling you, we're looking at it right now. Just remember, I tried to warn you. People ain't want to listen. All right? Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with, like this dumbass right here, is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you've been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up for our email newsletter there as well. If you want to support the African History Network, you can donate. We have Cash App now, dollar sign, the AHN Show, dollar sign, the AHN Show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show, and also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you want to advertise with the African History Network, email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and we can let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. All right, so let's look at this first story here. And then New York Times has a live update, because there's so much going on. It's a very, very fluid story. New York Times has live updates at nytimes.com. Iran shifts on a landmark nuclear deal, live updates, etc. But if you go to the first article I read about this from NBCnews.com, U.S. airstrike kills top Iran general Qassem Soleimani at Baghdad airport. Okay, Soleimani's death could drastically increase tensions with Iran, which were heightened by the New Year's attacks on the U.S. embassy compound in Baghdad. So the U.S. killed under Trump's order. Now, Trump is at Mar-a-Lago, and when it was delivered to him that Soleimani was killed, Donald Trump was eating meatloaf and vanilla ice cream. Imagine that, right? But the United States killed a high-profile commander of Iran's secretive Quds Force, QUDS, with a drone strike in Iraq early Friday. The Department of Defense said, quote, at the direction of Donald Trump, president, they call him president, the U.S. military has taken decisive defensive action to protect U.S. Personnel abroad, end quote, the department said in a statement announcing the death of General Qassem Soleimani, a commander of Iran's military forces in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and elsewhere throughout the Middle East. Okay, now, most people who have knowledge of this, most people are not saying this guy was a great guy. But the question that people are asking, he's been on the radar for years. He's been on the radar of the intelligence agencies, U.S. government, presidents for years. So the question people are asking is, why now? Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was on the Sunday shows this morning saying that there was an imminent threat. Okay, now reports are coming out saying they haven't been able to point to a specific threat. They said there was an imminent threat, General Qassem was planning attacks, but that's like business as usual. Why now? And what many people are saying, who are knowledgeable about this subject, many people are saying, wait a second, you don't just enter in something like this until you have a plan of action and you weigh the consequences, because there will be consequences. So the deadly airstrike will raise tensions between the U.S. and Iran, which were already heightened by the New Year's attacks on the U.S. embassy compound in Baghdad. Another man, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandis, said to be the deputy of the militias known as the Popular Mobilization Units, and a close advisor to Soleimani, was also killed in the airstrike near Baghdad's airport, according to Iraqi television reports. The PMU, Popular Mobilization Units, that al-Mohandes and Soleimani were killed when their vehicle. The PMU tweeted that al-Mohandes and Soleimani were killed when their vehicle was hit on the road to the airport. Now, in the past, the United States had credited Soleimani's militias with combating a U.S. enemy in Iraq, the Islamic State militant group. Soleimani's Quds force was a division of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, widely believed to support many terrorist groups such as Hezbollah. Now, the Defense Department said in a statement, quote, this strike was aimed at deterring future Iranian attacks. The United States will continue to take all necessary action to protect our people and our interests wherever they are around the world, end quote. Now, we're going to continue this on the other side of the break and share some clips with you, some news stories. Stay tuned. You listen to 910 AM Superstation Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep, the African History Network Show. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network Show right here on 910 AM Superstation Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 5th, 2020. Happy New Year. Look at what we're dealing with. This is the example how elections have consequences. I told you in 2016, people thought I was playing games. No, elections have consequences. We're dealing with a real life example of that. Got 3,500 troops that are going to be deployed. These are real life human beings. This is not a video game. You can't just hit reset and get more lives. This is for real people. All right, so right before the break, we were talking about what took place Friday. We're talking about the airstrikes that Donald Trump ordered from his southern White House in Mar-a-Lago while he was there with his wealthy friends and eating meatloaf and vanilla ice cream. Iran General Qassem Soleimani and others were killed in this strike. Okay, so check out this article from NBCnews.com. This is a good article. It gives an overview. This is one of the first articles I read dealing with this. U.S. airstrike kills top Iran General Qassem Soleimani at Baghdad airport. All right. Now, let's continue here. Okay, so the Pentagon said that Soleimani had been actively developing plans to attack U.S. diplomats and service members in Iraq and elsewhere throughout the region. Okay, now, Soleimani, as a general, has already been replaced. People who understand this know, well, wait a second, you attacking Soleimani, that ain't going to stop their plans. That's going to make them come even harder. That's going to make them attack you even harder. So then, once again, people are sitting back asking, well, wait a second, and when you look at this, there was an article, so I read a number of articles dealing with this, right? I'm going to share some of them with you here. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but I'm share some of them with you. There was one article from the Washington Post, and I'm going to try to pull this up here because I've got about 50 tabs open. And this is after my hard drive crashed on me on my new laptop. Imagine that. I've only had it a year, this Hewlett Packard. But there's an article from the Washington Post that talked about how Trump, the thought process that led Trump to this decision. And what happened was you had his military leaders and things like this. They laid out options to him, and they put this option on the table because they just knew he wasn't dumb enough to actually do it. They put this extreme option on the table because they thought he would choose some of the less extreme options. And what did this dummy do? He chose the most extreme option. Okay? So I'm going to share that with you. This is a good article from the Washington Post that breaks this down. There's a number of articles that we read in the Washington Post, New York Times, as I do every day. But you sit back and you have to wonder the mental stability of somebody like this. And once again, we know he's under a lot of stress, and it's brought on by himself. I mean, he did it to himself. He self-impeached himself. We know this. So we'll continue. I'll pull up that article from Washington Post. All right, so Soleimani's death comes after rioters tried for 2 days to scale the fortress-like walls at the United States' largest embassy. They retreated under a show of force from the Pentagon. 100 Marines were airlifted into the compound, and about 700 more Army paratroopers are expected soon in Kuwait from a global response force based in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Okay, so that's part of the truth. There's going to be about 3,500 total that are going to be deployed. Now, earlier, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper threatened a preemptive strike against Iranian militias if there were any renewed attacks against U.S. personnel or interests in Iraq. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff told reporters that attackers would run into a buzzsaw. Now, the U.S. strike comes amid heightened tensions between the United States and Iran over rocket attacks in Iraq that U.S. officials had blamed on Iranian-backed forces, as well as the attempted breach of the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. The conflict at the embassy, the U.S. Embassy, occurred as U.S. fighter jets struck weapons depots in Iraq and Syria that the United States said were linked with a group called Kataib Hezbollah, which it blames for attacks on bases of the U.S.-led coalition fighting ISIS in recent months. At least 25 militia fighters were killed in the airstrikes. The strikes followed the death of a U.S. contractor who was killed December 27, 2019 in a rocket attack on an Iraqi military base in Kirkuk that also hosted coalition forces. Several U.S. service members were also injured. The Defense Department said in announcing the strike Thursday night that Qassem Soleimani had orchestrated attacks on coalition bases in Iraq over several months, including the December 27th attack that killed the U.S. contractor. He, quote, also approved the attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad that took place this week, end quote, the department said in the statement. Now, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif called the U.S. action, quote, an extremely dangerous and foolish escalation, end quote. Quote, the U.S. bears responsibility for all consequences of its rogue adventurism, end quote, Javad Zarif wrote on Twitter. Now, Norman Rule, R-O-U-L-E, I'm not exactly sure, but Rao or Rule, who is a 34-year CIA veteran who oversaw national intelligence policy on Iran before he retired in 2017, he said Iran is likely to retaliate with terrorism and cyber attacks. Norman Rule said in a telephone interview that the U.S. move puts Washington and Tehran in a confrontation unlike any other since the Iran hostage crisis in 1979. Okay, so I want to go to this clip here. This is clip 1. This is from the 11th hour, MSNBC. This is from Friday, June 3rd, 2020, when they're giving an overview of what happened. Let's go to this clip.
And tensions in the Middle East are dramatically higher tonight after yesterday's U.S. airstrike that killed Iranian General Qassem Soleimani. The United States is on a heightened state of alert in the region, and there are concerns in Washington about the potential for war with Iran. There is also word tonight from an Iraqi security official to NBC News that a second U.S. airstrike was carried out in Iraq several hours ago. According to the official, the attack took place north of Baghdad and targeted Iranian-backed Shiite militia leaders. There are reports that 6 people were killed. Our own Richard Engel points out that Shiite demonstrations are planned in Baghdad, where it is already Saturday morning right now, and he warns that those events could turn violent. As to the timing of yesterday's airstrike, senior State Department officials tell reporters that Soleimani had been planning what they said were, quote, imminent attacks targeting U.S. diplomats, military personnel, and facilities in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and other parts of the Middle East. A short time ago on Fox News, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the president's action against Iran is part of a plan.
The criticism has been there's no strategy. That's willful blindness. There's been a deep strategy that President Trump laid down now, goodness, almost 3 years ago. We've been delivering against that strategy. And to your point, a central part of that is building out a coalition.
Today, from his resort in Florida, the president had this message for Iran.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
Robert Costa of The Washington Post reports, quote, earlier Friday, several White House officials, including senior advisor Jared Kushner, discussed a possible primetime address by the president, but those plans did not materialize, per an official and GOP lawmaker familiar with the talks. There was internal debate in Florida about how to handle it all. The Iranians have also been discussing how they intend to respond. Today, they vowed to seek revenge for Soleimani's death, promising, quote, harsh retaliation. NBC News reports the Pentagon is tonight sending another 3,000 soldiers to the Middle East from a brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division. Several hundred were deployed earlier this week. On Capitol Hill tonight, lawmakers are deeply divided over the president's decision to kill Soleimani. Today, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said the president does not have the authority for war with Iran. He also said he was not briefed on the airstrikes, despite being a member of Congress's bipartisan Gang of Eight. Today, the president retweeted conservative filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza, who offered up this controversial theory on why Schumer was not told about the attack. He wrote this, quote, neither were the Iranians, and for pretty much the same reason. Now, Schumer was kept in the dark. His Senate colleague Lindsey Graham revealed today that he was briefed by the president a few days ago. And tonight, Graham told Fox News why the president went after Soleimani.
He miscalculated Donald Trump. After the contractor was killed from Shia militia controlled by Soleimani, the president made a decision that he would not tolerate any more attacks against American interest. And we caught the guy red-handed planning another attack, and the president killed him, and the world is safer.
Democrats, meantime, are considering their next steps. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia told their own Andrea Mitchell that he intends to try to force a debate over war with Iran.
I will file a resolution pursuant to the War Powers Act of 1974 to try to force Congress to have a debate about whether or not it is in the United States' interest to be at war with Iran. I don't think it is. Some of my colleagues may think otherwise, but we can't let the president make this decision on his own.
And Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky posted today this, quote, if we are go to war with Iran, the Constitution dictates that we declare war. For the very latest now, we begin with Ali Arouzi, NBC News Tehran bureau chief. He joins us from the Iranian capital, where, as we said, it is now Saturday morning. Ali, thank you for joining us. Let me start with this news tonight of a second airstrike just outside of Baghdad. What do you know about that? And does this indicate that the scope of operations here is broader than we understood it to be?
Hi, Steve. Yes, we are also hearing reports of a second airstrike in Baghdad. Now, there are conflicting reports coming in as to who was hit. Iraqi mobilization organization fronts are saying that this was not senior leadership that was hit, but a group of medics. So it's still kind of murky what's going on. Nonetheless, an attack was launched on them. So these are ongoing operations. They are still trying to hurt Iranian proxies and allies in this region, and that's only going to ratchet up tensions even further. Iran is now on a state of high alert. When I arrived back in Tehran, there was a strong security presence, not to mention pictures of Qassem Soleimani all over the city. And Iran is now planning their next move. They are deciding how they are going to take retaliatory action, although I don't think they're going to make some sort of knee-jerk reaction on what they do. But all of these attacks are going to stiffen the resolve of Iran and their militias in this region, and it's also going to make them want to show that they can hit back at some point. That even though Qassem Soleimani, a cult-like figure that was controlling all of these militias, has been assassinated assassinated. They want to show the United States that they're still strong, that they're still operational, and they still pose a major danger. So we are in uncharted territory here right now, Steve, after the killing of Qassem Soleimani. It's unclear what the next steps are going to be, even though there is a general consensus here in Iran that there will be a next step, and it will probably be quite a strong next strike by Iran. Looking at Iranian media feeds here and everything, there's been criticism that maybe Iran wasn't harder against America in Syria in the past. So they are now reevaluating how to deal with the United States. And let's not forget, there's also been a new commander appointed to the Quds Force. The Quds Force is the international arm of the IRGC, which Qassem Soleimani was the head of. The new head of the Quds Force has been issuing some pretty serious threats to the United States, so he'll probably want to act on those at some point.
Okay. All right, so that was from the 11th hour MSNBC. You can check that out, msnbc.com. Go to the 11th hour. That clip was from January 3rd, 2020. Okay, so earlier last week, Donald Trump, when asked about the possibility of war with Iran, Trump said, quote, "I don't see that happening. No, I don't think Iran would want that to happen," end quote. He went on to say from Mar-a-Lago, because he was there for New Year's Eve, for a New Year's Eve event on taxpayers' dollars. He said, "I want to have peace. I like peace. And Iran should want peace more than anybody." This is what Trump told reporters. Now, at least one lawmaker expressed alarm at the action, at the U.S. strike. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, tweeted, quote, "Soleimani was an enemy of the United States. That's not a question. The question is this. As reports suggest, did America just assassinate, without any congressional authorization, the second most powerful person in Iran, knowingly setting off a potential massive regional war?" This is what Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, tweeted. All right, so let's see. Now, the Trump, further in the article here, it talks about how, because you had Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, and Senator Ben Sasse, Republican from Nebraska, making responses. But the Trump administration announced in April that it was designating the Revolutionary Guard a foreign terrorist organization, which is the first time the United States had used that designation on part of another country's government. Since then, there have been several tense incidents involving the United States and Iran, including one in June 2019 when Iran shot down a U.S. surveillance drone that the Revolutionary Guard said had entered Iranian airspace. U.S. Central Command said the aircraft was in international airspace. The Trump administration also blamed Iran for an attack in September 2019 on oil sites in Saudi Arabia, which prompted the United States to deploy military forces to the Middle East that Secretary of Defense Mark Esper said at the time would be defensive in nature. Okay, so check out the article in its entirety. We'll post a link here on the thread of the broadcast. U.S. airstrike kills top Iran general Qassem Soleimani at Baghdad airport. Now, there was I saw the article that I was looking at from Washington Post, okay? And this is a crazy article. This deals with how Trump came to this conclusion. Okay, how Trump decided to kill a top Iranian general. This is from the Washington Post, January 3rd, 2020. On Sunday, Trump's most senior national security advisors joined him at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida, where Trump was beginning the second week of his holiday vacation. The officials told reporters that U.S. F-15 Strike Eagles had just attacked Iranian-sponsored militia groups at their bases in Iraq and Syria, in response to a series of rocket attacks that had culminated in the death of an American contractor 2 days earlier. But privately, a different topic had come up with an agitated Donald Trump. Whether to kill Iranian Major General Qassem Soleimani, whom military leaders described as responsible for the attack on an American citizen and likely to kill more American citizens. Why Trump chose this moment to explore an operation against the leader of Iran's Quds Force after tolerating Iranian aggression in the Persian Gulf for months was a matter of debate within his own administration. Officials gave differing and incomplete accounts of the intelligence they said prompted Trump to act. Now keep in mind, since the attack, based upon law, within 48 hours, Trump had to officially notify Congress. He did. But the information that was given to Congress is classified. So they can't reveal what the reasons were, or even if real credible reasons were given for this attack. Now, officials gave differing and incomplete accounts of the intelligence they said prompted Trump to act. Some said they were stunned by his decision, which could lead to war with one of America's oldest adversaries in the Middle East. Quote, "It was tremendously bold and even surprised many of us," said a senior administration official with knowledge of high-level discussions among Trump and his advisors, who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. On Friday, hours after a U.S. drone killed Soleimani, an Iraqi militia leader at the Baghdad airport, senior State Department officials told reporters that Iran had been plotting, quote, "imminent attacks directed at killing hundreds of Americans," okay, end quote, but declined to offer specifics. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told CNN on Friday that Soleimani, quote, "was actively plotting in the region to take actions, the big action as he described it, that would put dozens, if not hundreds of Americans' lives at risk. We know it was imminent," end quote. Now, in previous reports, going from Friday, Saturday, TheHill.com, NBC News, and I posted these articles so you can go back on my timeline and look at this. And also, I think rawstory.com had an article about this. Pompeo did not cite a specific incident or a specific threat that they said that this is why we did this. It was pretty vague. Secondly, Trump said they did this to stop a war, not start one. Well, which war are you referring to? Trump said he took this action to stop a war, not start one. Which war are you referring to that you're trying to stop? Now, on Capitol Hill, officials briefed lawmakers and staff but did not provide any details about the alleged Iranian targets or what made them imminent, according to people who were present. Some analysts were skeptical about the need to kill Soleimani. Okay, quote, there may well have been an ongoing plot, as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claims, but Soleimani was a decision maker, not an operational asset himself. Now, this statement was given by John Bateman, B-A-T-E-M-A-N, who served as a senior intelligence analyst on Iran at the Defense Intelligence Agency. He said killing him would be neither necessary nor sufficient to disrupt the operational progression of an imminent plot. What it might do instead is shock Iran's decision calculus, end quote, and deter future attack plans. Now, let me scroll down some here in this article. Defense officials describe Soleimani's planning as part of a continuation of earlier Iranian provocations, including the mining of ships in the Persian Gulf in May. A month later, Trump called off an airstrike at practically the last minute, an attack that had been intended to retaliate for Iran's downing of a U.S. surveillance drone. Okay, now they talk about in this article the thought process and how this came about. Let me see here. Let me see if I can, because I didn't have a chance to print this out. Let me see. But one of the things, Trump decides to act. Okay. At his resort in Florida, Trump was told that Soleimani was going to be coming to Baghdad. Senior officials felt he was taunting the United States by showing up in the Iraqi capital, implying that he could move around with impunity. Calls among the national security principles were convened by Vice President Mike Pence throughout the week after initial discussions on Sunday to kill Soleimani, a senior administration official said. Officials reminded Trump that after the Iranians mined ships down the U.S. drone and allegedly attacked a Saudi oil facility, he had not responded. Okay, Trump had not responded. Acting now, they said, would send a message. Quote, the argument is, if you don't ever respond to them, they think they can get by with anything, end quote, one White House official said. Trump was also motivated to act by what he felt was negative coverage after his 2019 decision to call off the airstrike after Iran downed the U.S. surveillance drone, officials said. Trump was also frustrated that the details of his internal deliberations had leaked out and felt he looked weak, the official said. You got to read this full article, because this goes deep into this. And one of the things they talk about here, and I'm trying to see if I can find it, is that killing Soleimani was like the most extreme thing you could do. And his advisors and things like this, they made that an option to force him to do less extreme things, right? So it's like, okay, so you have two extremes. You can do this over here, you can do this here, you can do this in the middle, you can do this over here. So they laid out killing Soleimani as an extreme to push him to do something less extreme. And what did this idiot do? He chose the same guy who got 5 deferments because he was too cowardly to serve in Vietnam. What did he do? He chose the most extreme outcome. He didn't like how it was leaked out previously. Okay. Trump was also frustrated that the details of his internal deliberations had leaked out and felt he looked weak. This is because of previous things that took place. Trump was also motivated to act by what he felt was negative coverage after his 2019 decision to call off the airstrike after Iran downed the U.S. surveillance drone, officials said. Trump was also frustrated that the details of his internal deliberations had leaked out and felt he looked weak, the official said. Read this entire article, okay? This goes into how this guy's not stable. And he's putting other children, he's putting the lives of other people's children in jeopardy. Okay, so now we see, Washington Post had this breaking news story before we went on the air. Let's see, what is this here? Trump threatens to retaliate. Let me go back. Because they're going. We know Iran announces suspending the 2015 Iran nuclear deal that President Obama negotiated. Trump threatens very big sanctions if Iraq forces out U.S. troops. Donald Trump told reporters on Air Force One that he would demand compensation for billions of dollars spent on an air base in Iraq. Quote, it'll make Iran's sanctions look somewhat tame, end quote, he added. Earlier on Sunday, Iran said it was suspending its commitments to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and abandoning its limits on uranium enrichment, research and development, and its stockpile of nuclear fuel. Okay, way to go, Trump. I want to go to this second clip here, and this is from, I think this one here, clip 2. I think this is from AM Joanne Reed. This is from Saturday morning. Let's go to this clip here. Turn up in here so they can hear you.
You put a narcissistic, megalomaniacal form of reality.
You start from the beginning.
Sorry to say, and this is what happens when you put a narcissistic, megalomaniacal former reality TV star with a thin skin and a very large temper in charge of the world's most powerful military. He does things like this. And some of us were warning that he would do something like this for years. When some of my colleagues in the media, including liberals and lefties, were buying into this nonsense that Trump is some sort of dove or anti-war candidate or isolationist or anti-interventionist, the rest of us were trying to say, no, you can't put a person like this in charge of nuclear weapons. You can't allow him to run foreign policy when he doesn't know anything about foreign policy. And you get a decision like this where, a lot of people are saying, what's the strategy? Trump doesn't do strategy. Trump, as you mentioned in your introduction, sees these images, gets angry at what's happening to the US embassy in Iraq, wants to be tough and macho, wants to do something that Obama didn't do, always obsessed with his predecessor, and gives this order. And you mentioned in your introduction that Pentagon officials didn't think he'd be crazy enough to pick the extreme option they put in front of him. Who are these officials? Were they asleep for the last 3 years that they thought that they could put an option like this in front of a psychopath like Trump and he wouldn't take it? I mean, it's absolutely irresponsible, mad, I would say, for anyone working around Trump to offer him plans like this. God help us all what next set of options they give him if the Iranians retaliate. And the Iranians are saying they will retaliate. As you mentioned, Trump is already bragging about war crimes on Twitter, saying he'll attack cultural sites. You know who else attacks cultural sites? ISIS, the Taliban. Is that the company the US president wants to keep?
I mean, yes. I mean, he's keeping the company of Saudi Arabia, Putin. Like, his choices of people he admires are people who don't respect kind of the laws of normal behavior in the world as leaders, right? Like, that's who he respects. It is shocking to say that, first of all, they should take his TV away, maybe, because watching things on TV makes him do stuff like this.
Yes.
Let me go to former Ambassador Michael McFaul. Donald Trump told his party guests what he was going to do, apparently. He chatted with Lindsey Graham, who's not on the Gang of Eight. So he was not one of the people entitled to know in advance. He didn't tell the actual Gang of Eight. He didn't tell Congress what he was going to do. And his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, did talk to somebody, Russia. The Russian Federation Foreign Minister, Mike Pompeo, tweets about the fact that he met with the Russian Foreign Minister, Lavrov. And he says that he and Lavrov discussed the decisive defensive action Donald Trump employed in Baghdad to protect American lives. I emphasize that de-escalation is the United States' principal goal. The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov warned Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, apparently in that discussion, that a drone strike that killed senior Iranian commander Qassem Soleimani was illegal and threatened Middle Eastern stability and peace. This morning, David Gura was reporting earlier that the Russian administration is now saying that this was a gross violation of international law. So Trump told them after the fact, but even Russia, who Donald Trump is quite in league with, is saying this is a horror. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't know where to begin. I think the central point is what you were just discussing. What is the U.S. strategy vis-a-vis Iran today, and how does this latest action help us achieve it? What is scary for me is that there does not seem to be a process in place to develop and implement a national security policy. The president has said, and Secretary Pompeo has said, if you go back and you look at his speech that he gave on Iran a couple years ago, he outlined several goals. One is to make Americans safer. Two is to permanently dismantle the Iran nuclear program. Three is to end all terrorism in the region. And four, by some, not all, is to bring more democratic change to Iran. On all four of those policy objectives, it's very difficult to see how this latest killing of Mr. Soleimani achieves any of those four goals. And I think we need to start judging them and judging their actions by the objectives that they themselves have set up. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to stop blaming President Obama for the situation we're in, as Secretary Pompeo has done several times already this morning. He keeps saying we had to restore deterrence. I just want to remind everybody, they have been in power now for 3 years. If they're restoring deterrence, that means that they had not achieved that objective over the last 3 years.
Well, not only that, but the deterrence was the Iran nuclear deal, when Europe and the United States made a deal with this regime to try to bring it back into normalcy around the world. They are the ones who pulled out of that deal. This wasn't President Obama who did that. They did that.
Okay. All right. So that was from AM Joy, Joanne Reed, MSNBC. That was from Saturday, January 4th, 2020. I want to squeeze in this last clip. You got the clip from Morning Joe?
Yep.
You got the, okay, let's go to this clip right here.
War with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective. So the only way he figures that he's going to get reelected, and as sure as you're sitting there, is to start a war with Iran. Unfortunately, we have a president that doesn't know the first thing about negotiation. We have a real problem in the White House. So I believe that he will attack Iran sometime prior to the election because he thinks that's the only way he can get elected. Isn't it pathetic?
Oh, no. Keep going.
Oh, there's more.
Our confession with that man. That was Donald Trump back in 2011, safely in the cocoon of his corner office at Trump Tower, in part of a video series that was later removed from the Trump Organization's YouTube channel. As you heard there, Donald Trump has repeatedly suggested his predecessor would strike Iran only to help him politically at home. In 2011, Trump tweeted, quote, "In order to get elected, Barack Obama will start a war with Iran." The following year, he posted, quote, "Now that Obama's poll numbers are in at the tailspin, watch for him to launch a strike in Libya or Iran. He is desperate." A few days later, quote, "Don't let Obama play the Iran card in order to start a war in order to get elected. Be careful, Republicans." In 2013.
Pause it there. Okay, so now that's from Morning Joe Friday morning. This is Trump. Now this was Trump in 2011, 2012. He recorded a video of himself. He thought he was attacking President Obama, but he was really telling on himself. Because all this stuff he was accusing Obama that Obama might do, this is what Trump is doing right now. We're coming up on a break. I'm going to play this again for you in its entirety on the other side of the break. Then we'll get into this article from NPR.org, how the CIA overthrew Iran's democracy in 4 days. We'll talk about the Madam C.J. Walker movie coming out. We'll talk about why African Americans eat black-eyed peas on New Year's Day and other topics. 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio, the African History Network Show. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network Show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, we're in our second hour. It is Sunday, January 5th, 2020. Happy New Year. So we're talking about the U.S. strike on Iraq that Trump ordered that killed the Iranian general Qassem Soleimani. We're talking about the fallout from that. We're going to change topics here in a few minutes. I'm going to, before we change topics, I'm going to get to this article from NPR.org, how the CIA overthrew Iran's democracy in 4 days. And this goes back to 1953. Okay. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network. Also, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, paypal.me/TheAHNShow. Also through Cash App, the $ TheAHNShow, through Cash App, $ TheAHNShow through Cash App. And also you can email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com if you need me to email you those links as well. Shout out to everybody watching us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Also be sure to follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. I'm going to go back to this clip here. I'm going to play it in its entirety. This is from Morning Joe, Friday morning, January 3rd, 2020. And this is Donald Trump from 2012 telling on himself. Let's go to this clip.
The president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective. So the only way he figures that he's going to get reelected, and as sure as you're sitting there, is to start a war with Iran. Unfortunately, we have a president that doesn't know the first thing about negotiation. We have a real problem in the White House. So I believe that he will attack Iran sometime prior to the election because he thinks that's the only way he can get elected. Isn't it pathetic?
Everything is projection or confession with that man. That was Donald Trump back in 2011, safely in the cocoon of his corner office at Trump Tower, in part of a video series that was later removed from the Trump Organization's YouTube channel. As you heard there, Donald Trump has repeatedly suggested his predecessor would strike Iran only to help him politically at home. In 2011, Trump tweeted, quote, "In order to get elected, Barack Obama will start a war with Iran."
The following year, he posted, quote, "Now that Obama's poll numbers are in at the tailspin, watch for him to launch a strike in Libya or Iran. He is desperate." A few days later, quote, "Don't let Obama play the Iran card in order to start a war in order to get elected. Be careful, Republicans." In 2013, Trump tweeted, "I predict that President Obama will at some point attack Iran in order to save face." Speaking of presidents in trouble politically, the year of their election, shapers last night were suggesting a possible wag the dog scenario. We want to show you this New York Times headline from December 17th, 1998, looking eerily similar to what we are waking up to today. It reads, "Impeachment vote in House delayed as Clinton launches Iraq airstrikes, citing military need to move swiftly." According to the Times, then President Clinton launched the offensive on Iraq
this is another video
before a House Republicans began their closed-door strategy session to discuss the impeachment vote. Of course, this morning, for the first time in months, well, in years, we're talking neither about Ukraine or Russia. I'm sure these are we'll just talk about parallels between now and 1998. Do you see any?
Well, obviously, it will raise those questions, and it will raise suspicions on the part of some of the president's critics. One of the things that President Clinton faced in 1998 was this, extraordinary confluence of events at the same time, and Republicans were just as suspicious as Democrats may be today about his motivations for launching that attack. The advantage President Clinton had 21 years ago when he did that was he had a Republican defense secretary in William Cohen. He'd been a senator, of course, from Maine for many years, and Bill Cohen went to Congress and said, "No, this is legitimate. This is something we need to do. This has nothing to do with impeachment," and that helped, obviously, the president get through that. The question is whether this president or anybody working for him has that kind of credibility with the Congress that will be able to say, "Hey, don't worry, don't engage in this kind of conspiracy-minded suspicions." It's a harsher time now, and it's a more suspicious time, and we'll see. It hasn't yet played out the way it might in the days to come. We'll see how Democrats respond to this. So far, what Democrats are saying is to criticize what they see as the reckless quality of this without necessarily tying it to politics. They're worried about escalation, or say they're worried about escalation, even as they agree that Soleimani was a bad actor on the stage. But we'll see. We'll see where that goes. There's the old rally around the president during times of national security crisis phenomenon we used to experience in Washington seems to have dissipated in recent years. That even moments like this, when a country is facing a serious overseas conflict, it ends up being divided into politics. The water's edge is no longer a boundary for that.
Okay. All right, so that was from Morning Joe. That was from Friday morning, January 3rd, 2020. And that dealt with Trump. That dealt with that. Now, that was so Trump can't say the media is lying and they're making stuff up, because that's a video that Trump recorded himself and released to the media. That was Trump who did that himself. That was 2011. And then there are tweets that resurfaced from 2011 to 2012. And Trump was projecting. He was telling on himself. And what he said Obama would do is exactly what Trump is doing right now. All right, so, and then the clip that I played from AM Joy, that Joanne Reed, that was from January 5th, 2020. I thought it was from the 4th. Soleimani killing a massive Iran strategy failure, experts say. And you heard Mehdi Hassan, who is a columnist for The Intercept, as well as former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Okay, so you can watch that clip at msnbc.com under AM Joy. All right. Okay, I want to go to this article quickly, then we'll go to the phone lines. Okay, 313-778-7600. We'll go to the phone lines in just a minute. We have Chuck on line 1, stand by. 313-778-7600. And they have a lot to cover in this last hour here. All right, so NPR.org had a really good article dealing with how the CIA overthrew Iran's democracy in 4 days. Now, this goes back to 1953, okay? And this article originally came out January 31st, 2019, a year ago. But, All this stuff keeps popping up. You know, history has a way of repeating itself. So, August 21st, 1953, a resident of Tehran watches Yankee go home from a wall in the capital city of Iran. The new prime minister, Fazlollah Zahidi, requested to clean up after the overthrow of his predecessor. Okay? Now, on August 19, 2013, the CIA, so this would be 7 years ago. August 13th, August 19th, 2013, I should say. The CIA publicly admitted for the first time its involvement in the 1953 coup against Iran's elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, Mossadegh. The documents provided details of the CIA's plan at the time, which was led by senior officer Kermit Roosevelt Jr. Now, Kermit Roosevelt Jr. was the grandson of U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, now over the course of 4 days in August of 1953, Kermit Roosevelt Jr. would orchestrate not one but two attempts to destabilize the government of Iran, forever changing the relationship between the country and the U.S. In this, so this was an episode from National Public Radio. They have the podcast there. When you pull up this article, they have the podcast there, and you can go through and listen to it in its entirety. Okay. So in this episode, we go back to retrace what happened in the inaugural episode of Mohammad Mossadegh. In the inaugural episode of NPR's new history podcast called Throughline. Now, Mohammad Mossadegh was a beloved figure in Iran. During his tenure, he introduced a range of social and economic policies, the most significant being the nationalization of the Iranian oil industry. Great Britain had controlled Iran's oil for decades through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. So when you look at all these fights, right, it's usually over land or resources. It could be over a woman, okay, but usually it's over land and resources. Usually what this is about. And if it's in the Middle East, it's probably over what Europeans call the Middle East, what they call the Middle East, right? If it's in what is called the Middle East, it's a good chance it's over oil, one way or another. So Great Britain had controlled Iran's oil for decades through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. After months of talks, the Prime Minister broke off negotiations and denied the British any further involvement in Iran's oil industry. Britain then appealed to the United States for help, who eventually led the CIA to orchestrate the overthrow of Mossadegh and restore power to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran. Now, on August 19th, so you had massive protests that broke out. They have some pictures here that you can look at. Okay, one of them is a massive protest that broke out August 19th, 1953. Massive protests broke out across Iran, leaving almost 300 dead in firefights in the streets of Tehran. Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh was soon overthrown in a coup orchestrated by the CIA and British intelligence. Okay, the Shah was reinstalled as Iran's leader. So one thing I learned from studying history, right? If you have another country and the U.S. says this country hates the U.S., one thing I learned to ask is why. Now, I'm not saying the U.S. always did something wrong. I'm not saying the other country was always right. What I'm saying is I learned to ask the question why and go back and look in history and see what actually happened. Because sometimes you see that the country, the U.S. and this country were allies until the leader of this country did something that the U.S. said was wrong or something like that. Now all of a sudden they're an enemy. Now you want regime change, right? So when I see something, and there are some countries that are legitimate enemies of the U.S. One of them is the one that helped Trump get reelected, helped Trump get elected, right? But it causes me to go back and look and say, well, what actually happened? Okay, so according to Stephen Kinzer, Kinzer, author of the book All the Shah's Men, Kermit Roosevelt Jr. quickly seized control of the Iranian press by buying them off with bribes and circulating anti-Mossadegh propaganda, circulating anti-propaganda of the then Iranian prime minister. He recruited allies among the Islamic clergy, and he convinced the Shah of Iran that Mossadegh was a threat. The last step entailed a dramatic attempt to apprehend Mossadegh at his house in the middle of the night, but the coup failed. Mossadegh learned of it and fought back. The next morning, he announced victory over the radio. So, but if we look at this, because see, when a coup happens, if one of the first things that are taken over is the media, the press. This is why when you have a dictator like Donald John Trump, who made a career when he was a real estate when he was a real estate mogul and a reality TV star, he made a career of doing interviews with the press. He even has a history of faking being his own publicist and doing interviews in the media talking about how great he is. But then when he's running for president, now he wants to talk about how bad the media is, even though he got about $2 billion in free media coverage during the 2016 election. And he made a career on being in the media. He made a career on being on the cover of New York tabloids, right? With his escapades and cheating on his wives and all types of stuff like this. He made a career in the media. Now he has a problem with the media. He was in Home Alone 2 for 7 seconds, right? And then in 2014, they had to cut out 8 minutes when it was going to TV to make room for commercials. And then we just saw, it came out that he was cut, his great 7 minutes was cut, 7 seconds, I should say 7 seconds, 7 minutes. Whoa, that's 3 times as much as he lasted with Stormy Daniels, according to her report. So you have to put all this together. It's like, but wait a second. It's the press that's going to hold Trump accountable. This is why he hates the Washington Post so much. It's the press that is going to hold Trump accountable. When you go to the Washington Post, and I have a digital subscription to the Washington Post and New York Times. I read them every day. I get email alerts through them throughout the day. You see some of the articles I post on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. You see some articles from the New York Post and Washington Times, New York Times and Washington Post, right? For the Washington Post, at the top, it says, democracy dies in darkness. Democracy dies in darkness. And when you start having attacks on the press, on the media, and there's a First Amendment right of the media, and you have somebody like Trump who made a career on manipulating the media, made a career on doing interviews, and then you have him attacking the media, you have to ask the question, why? What is he trying to cover up? What is he trying to hide? So Stephen Kinzer, author, Kinzer, author of the book, All the Shah's Men, said that Kermit Roosevelt Jr. quickly seized control of the Iranian press by buying them off with bribes and circulating anti-Mossadegh propaganda. He recruited allies among the Islamic clergy, and he convinced the Shah that Mossadegh was a threat. The last step entailed a dramatic attempt to apprehend Mossadegh at his house in the middle of the night, but the coup failed. Mossadegh learned of it and fought back. The next morning, he announced victory over the radio. So Mossadegh thought that he was in the clear, but Kermit Roosevelt Jr. had not given up. He orchestrated a second coup, which succeeded. Mossadegh was placed on trial and spent his life under house arrest. The Shah of Iran returned to power and ruled for another 25 years until the 1979 Iranian Revolution. The 1953 coup was later invoked by students and the political class in Iran as a justification for overthrowing the Shah. So when we look at, you gotta go back and look at history. So when you have a country that hates the U.S., you have to ask why. They ain't just wake up one morning hating the U.S. I'm not saying the reason why they hate the U.S. is valid. I'm not saying it's invalid. I'm saying we have to ask the question why and research this. What happened? And then when we usually see these fights in the Middle East, it's usually over land or oil or both. Okay, so check out this article here from NPR.org. There's more you can read. There are pictures here. How the CIA overthrew Iran's democracy in 4 days. And Kermit Roosevelt Jr. was the grandson of U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Okay? And he was a senior officer. Kermit Roosevelt Jr. was a senior officer in the CIA. So if we look at the article from History.com, History.com is the official website of the History Channel. Okay, we're coming up on a break. U.S.-Iran tensions, from the hostage crisis to sanctions to drone strikes. So the hostage crisis, right, was precipitated by the overthrow of the Iranian government by the CIA in 1953. If we look at this article from History.com, okay, they open up with Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh is ousted. In 1953, U.S. and British intelligence agencies collaborated to organize a coup to remove Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The secular Mossadegh had sought to nationalize the Iranian oil industry, which had previously been controlled by Great Britain. U.S. officials, meanwhile, had feared Mossadegh might turn to the Soviet Union for aid. In 2013, the CIA released documents that publicly admitted its involvement in the 1953 coup. The coup, which reinstated the monarchy under the Western-friendly Shah of Iran, eventually fueled a surge of nationalism which culminated in the 1979 Iranian Revolution. I thought the U.S. was promoting democracy. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. 9:10 AM Superstation Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep, the African History Network Show. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network Show right here on 9:10 AM the Superstation the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 5th, 2020. And we start out the new year with this nonsense. Happy New Year, everybody. This is what happens when you have an idiot in the White House. Tried to warn you. Okay, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. If you have a question or comment right before the break, I was sharing with you the history of how the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran in 1953. NPR.org, National Public Radio, has an article from January 31st, 2019, and the people were reposting this the past few days, how the CIA overthrew Iran's democracy in 4 days. This deals with Kermit Roosevelt Jr., who was a senior officer in the CIA, and he's the grandson of U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, how he orchestrated a coup in Iran in 1953. And then also, this history ties into So the past few days you've been hearing people make references to the Iran hostage crisis of 1979. President Jimmy Carter was president then. So history.com, I should say, the official website of the History Channel, has a good article that they just updated January 3rd, 2020, and they reposted, entitled U.S.-Iran Tensions from the Hostage Crisis to Sanctions to Drone Strikes. And this article starts out talking about the 1953 coup of the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and how that coup was orchestrated by the U.S. CIA and British intelligence. Okay? So we'll continue this. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Chuck, line 1. Chuck, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Thanks for calling. Tell us where you're calling from.
I just wanted to ask you in particular, you have a African History Network?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's like your profession, right?
It's one of the things I do.
Okay, I'm saying that, I'm asking that, or bringing that to attention because me personally, I expect to hear something in reference to African history.
We're going to do that too. This is a 2-hour show. I do this show every Sunday. We deal with current events also. I've been doing this 10 years, 4 years here on this network. You have a question, Chuck?
Yeah, my point is, why waste time name calling other ethnics and other,
I didn't name call any ethnic groups. Whoa, Chuck. I didn't name call any ethnic groups. What ethnic group did I name call? I didn't name call any. No, you said I name call ethnic groups.
You were saying how stupid Donald Trump is.
He is.
Ignorant and this and that.
He is. But I didn't name call ethnic groups, Chuck. Chuck, slow down. Chuck. I deal with that, Chuck. I've been doing. Whoa. Okay, thanks for calling, Chuck. I didn't name call any ethnic group. Okay, you need to clean the wax out of your ears, Chuck. I've been doing this show 4 years. You've called in here a number of times. You know I deal with our history, but I also deal with current events. Let's go to John. John, line 2. Thanks for calling. Thanks for holding. Welcome to the African History Network show.
Happy New Year to you, Hotep.
Hey, Happy New Year.
He got to do a lot of cleaning out here because he always come up with that kind of.
He always come up with some dumbass nonsense. But go ahead.
Yeah, Hotep. I just want to know when you familiar with these robocalls calls that some of these Republicans run into the black community come out. They were Trump, saying that they were Trump and said that they were putting up some of the African Americans to call some of these black shows and said they support Trump. And I just want to know when you familiar with
I'm familiar with the robocalls. Now you said there are robocalls that Republicans are sending out to African Americans to get them to call into radio shows and say they support Trump.
To black radio stations and try to get people confused about they're not voting. They're for Trump and all that stuff. And I don't see that way voting because that's what they're trying to confuse the voters.
Right.
And they only call the black station. They don't call the white station.
So now, where'd you hear about this, John?
Well, they said that it will come out of Atlanta. Some of them after the mail claimed that they were Trump and so forth. And that's where it got started at. So I just wonder if you heard about it and so forth.
No, not that.
Some of them was calling only the black stations trying to confuse the people by not voting and all that stuff.
Right. Well, that's because they're not going to try that with the white stations because they know they get cut off. See, they know they get cut off because when you listen to white radio shows, you listen to like right wing conservative radio, you listen to white talk show. Ain't none of them talking about not voting.
That's right.
Because if you listen to them in 2016, they said this is about the courts. They said this is about the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal court. Okay. Most of them were talking about not voting. You probably couldn't find none of the prominent white hosts who were talking about not voting because they understood the importance of it. Okay?
That's right.
Yeah.
And you never heard him do that way and so forth. So I just wondered that I heard some African American call this station on weekdays, telling them I ain't feeling, I'm not voting, none of all that little crazy talk and so forth. And I told the guests to don't entertain that garbage and so forth.
That's ridiculous because not voting is how you got Trump. That's how you got Trump's $1.4 trillion tax cut for the wealthy and for his wealthy donors like the Robert Mercer family and the Sheldon Adelson family that increased the national debt by almost $1 trillion. But at the same time, you know, a lot of African Americans
$1 trillion, yeah.
right, but $1 trillion, yeah, to the national debt. He's increased. So that's to the national debt. He's increased the overall national debt by $3 trillion. It's up to $22 trillion right now. It blew a hole in the budget deficit, the annual budget deficit. His $1 trillion tax cut, but also what his $1 trillion tax cut did was that, you know, many people would get a tax refund. Now, many of those people didn't get a tax refund in their old taxes. That's thanks to Donald Trump's tax cut.
Yeah,
okay. So and then Trump wants to kick off about 700,000 or so people off of SNAP, food stamps. You gave a $1.4 trillion tax cut to the wealthy.
That's right.
Then you want to kick off about 700,000 people off of food stamps. Okay. You've had 91 Fortune 500 corporations who, because of his new tax cut, paid zero taxes.
Yeah, that's right. And
so
they loaded in billions of dollars. They got all kinds of money now.
But now you have the suicide rates of farmers increasing because of Trump's tariffs. And it's expected that his tariffs are going to cost the average American family an additional $1,000 a year in the increase that they're going to have to pay for goods, pay for crops, different food, things like this, right? This all see politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Okay, so black people who talking about not voting, I hope you don't have a loved one in the military who could be deployed because of this idiot in the White House.
Exactly.
I hope you don't have a friend or a loved one in the military who could be deployed because of this idiot in the White House. All right, John. Thanks for calling. I got to get these other calls. All right, thanks. Okay, let's go to line 3. James, welcome to the African. Is that James, line 3? James, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from. Thanks for holding.
Yes, I'm calling from Detroit.
Go ahead.
I've been hearing you lately. I'm glad to hear the information that you're giving.
Thanks.
Because I learned about the Middle East in the 3rd grade.
Okay.
6 years ago. And I learned that from watching the night news. And I'll make this real short. Let me just talking about the map and everything. But as far as Iran and all that's going on, really, I don't think it's going to be a war. Donald Trump want to talk that stuff because they say, and it's to the other caller, that area over there, Middle East is not a continent. That's part of Lower Asia and Africa, over that region.
Right.
All that. So that is got something to do with African history. And what you were saying, what happened, if you go back in history, why people hate America, why certain countries, the European countries and the United States have been running shotgun through Europe, from Africa to the Middle East, through those regions all over the world.
Right.
Okay? And so, anyway, I don't think it's going to be a war because this is something that the United States will do not need. It won't happen. Because I'm going to tell you something. You remember, like North Korea, that's the reason why they have the nuclear weapons. Okay? The United States can blow and do the first strike, whatever. That changes everything because when they release their payload, okay, that goes to the world's atmosphere. People must understand something. Nuclear weapons is a no-no. Okay,
you said nuclear weapons is what?
It's a no-no.
It's a no-no, right?
It's never happened. You know when he was talking all that bluster about Barack and Kim Jong-un, about Bush, when he really couldn't do nothing with North Korea, okay, because why? The United States, it's like this. You can have 10 AK-47 and I can have 2. If you release whatever you got, some of that stuff's going through also.
Right.
So I mean, because you got South Korea, you got Japan, they would obliterate that area. Then the United States got to answer to who? China, Russia. Not only that, forget that, the atmosphere. This world cannot take human civilization cutting up like that. So what he's doing over there, he just adding to these people in the country and voting for him. These people are not stupid. They choose to do this. They choose to vote this. Donald Trump has no interest for the lower middle class, the poor.
Right, that's true. He's using them, right? He's using them, exactly. Because at the same time, he's trying to take away health care from 20 million plus people. A lot of them are poor white people who voted for him.
Not only that, who votes for that? You don't like your body, you don't love yourself.
Well. Here's the thing. See, once again, a lot of people operate. So if we look at the people who voted for him, he got 63 million votes. Okay, a lot of people who voted for Trump. Some of them were what we call Trump supporters, MAGA hat wearing Trump supporters. Other people were not Trump supporters. They voted for Trump by default because they were operating based upon an agenda. They said this is about the courts. Okay, they said this is about the Supreme Court and controlling the Supreme Court, getting Supreme Court justice confirmations, and this is about the federal courts because you have evangelicals who have been trying to overturn Roe versus Wade since 1973. They want control of the federal courts and control of the U.S. Supreme Court to do this, and also because this is also about the year 2043. This is about the browning of America and the fear that some white people have of becoming a minority population in this country. So by 2043, white people, the U.S. Census Bureau is predicting and demographers are predicting that by 2043, white people will no longer be the majority population in this country. So what you have is you have an effort by Republicans to control the courts for the next 25, 30, 35 years because they know they're losing in population. This is what this is all about. This is what the census question that Trump wanted to add to the census that hasn't been on the census about 50 years or so regarding citizenship. Because when you read the U.S. Constitution created the U.S. Census. The census is not supposed to count every citizen. It's supposed to count everybody in the U.S., period, regardless of status. But what that does is if you put the citizenship question on there, then you have some households in the U.S. They could be in Texas, they can be in Detroit, they can be in Brooklyn, Queens, where you have people who live in a household who are U.S. citizens. They're here legally. But you can have other people in that same household, they could be relatives, who are here, quote unquote, illegally. Well, if that's the case, that can cause everybody in the house not to respond to the census. And what that does is the population count that the census operates based upon for federal funding to cities and states, that comes from the U.S. Census. Okay? So if you put that citizenship question on the census, it can reduce the counted population of a California. It can reduce the counted population of a Michigan. What this does is, if you reduce the counted population, then it's that U.S. Census population that then determines how many seats in the House of Representatives every state has and every city has. It is that count, and it is that determination of how many seats in the U.S. House of Representatives a city or state has that determines how many electoral college votes that a state has. So if you can reduce the counted population in Michigan, which has 16 electoral college votes, you can reduce the number of votes that Michigan has in electoral college, which shifts the balance of power when it comes determining the president in 2020. Because you need 270 electoral college votes. You can shift the balance of power. That's what that one question was all about. That impacts African Americans in Detroit, in Michigan, out in California, all across this country. But we don't understand this. Go ahead.
See, our people, we the canary in the coal mine.
Yep.
When you live in the country, you have to participate in the political system. If you just vote, period. If you just vote, your local, your state, and your national.
Right.
You really doing other things else, you must participate. Because if you know, a lot of our people are ignorant of our history. They know some of it, but they don't know the truth.
We know very little, brother. I speak all across the country, man. We know very little, but go ahead.
Yes, they don't know the true history of it. Okay, now as far as one thing that these voters that vote for Trump, they can't stop time. You see, time is crucial. Now the Senate, you know, like you said, they put the judges in and all like that. Let them reverse Roe v. Wade. Let them do it.
You said, what was your last statement? You said, what need? What'd you say?
The Senate, you know, the Senate put the judges in, you know, McConnell in.
Yeah, the U.S. Senate confirms the judges that the president nominates, the federal judges, yes.
And he put clowns in there. People that don't even qualify.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, and these are a lot of these nominations that are getting confirmed by Senator Mitch McConnell and Republicans in the Senate. Not only are some of them unqualified, and the American Bar Association has come out and said these people are unqualified, but a lot of them are anti-civil rights as well. That's another thing. Yes.
Totally. Not only that, but okay, not just that. Let them reverse Roe v. Wade, okay? So what do the white evangelical or the Christian members in this country, what else they have to push though? See, when they put these judges in, that's about prison systems. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of things down the pipeline that affect the brown people in this country.
It affects the rights of unions and the rights of unions to collective bargaining. It's going to impact affirmative action when it comes to college admissions. Okay, like the case at the University of Texas, that's going to come up before the Supreme Court again, and it goes through the federal courts, goes through the appellate court, then it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's going to be a number of cases that are going to impact African Americans. Go ahead.
It doesn't matter if you get a president of your choice.
Mm-hmm.
Democratic president. I mean, a Democratic president. I mean, you know, not a Republican president, but a Democratic president. So if you get that, he would get stonewalled in the courts.
Yeah, he very could. Yeah,
you know,
it could happen.
That he would make.
Right.
He can't move certain things. Okay?
Right.
But here's the thing about all that. The people that voted for Donald Trump, there's only one reason that he turned out. His language. Here's the key thing about it. And these people say whatever. They're not fools. You can be racist and evil and hatred, but you're not even a fool. You know there's a reason why you're that way. You choose to be that way.
Right.
For one thing, why would you? Knowing this guy is a multi-billionaire or whatever. He's rich. Got the world on offer. You only got so many years on the planet left.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Why do you want to do harm on this planet leaving out? For what reason?
Right.
What reason? All these stupid, like Bill Gates, he doesn't impress me. He's sitting there, no human being should be sitting there with that kind of wealth. That means you didn't pay somebody. That means some people that's worked for you. Amazon, all these, I'm not saying that the company, okay, yeah.
Well, from what I understand, like the compensation, like, what I understand, Microsoft is different than Amazon, so I don't want to just put them all in the same.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But here's the debate on the healthcare. Okay, so they want to get rid of Obamacare, so that they passed a law in Congress years ago that a company has to have 100 or so many people to work for apply have offer their healthcare. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's knock that rule out and see what happens with America, and see what these people drop everything and say, oh no, you can't do that.
Right.
So they change quickly. Same thing, so what they call it is affordable health care. That's for people that can't afford this all these high premiums in health care. Okay?
Right.
Why would you even put somebody in office to even think like it? Because you might fall down on your luck. You might not have something, you know what I'm saying?
Right. You may need you may need those policies someday. Okay, James, we'll run out of time, but thanks for calling, man. Keep listening. Okay, so and then keep in mind, right? You had people who rose up across the country to save the Affordable Health Care Act, when many white people learned that the Affordable Health Care Act and Obamacare were the same thing, because they found out that they had the affordable health. They found out they had Obamacare, and it was called the Affordable Health Care Act. So then you started seeing people all across the country organize, and one of the documents they used to organize was called Indivisible. And they were outside every Tuesday. They were outside of their member of the House of Representatives office or their U.S. Senator's office saying, don't take away my health care. Because New York Times had a study that showed that really is about 35% of Americans did not know the Affordable Health Care Act and Obamacare were the same thing. And then it was Senator John McCain, you remember, he gave the thumbs down to save in the Senate to save the Affordable Health Care Act. What happened was a lot of people realized they had in this black man was saving their lives. That's what happened. Let's keep it real. Okay? All right, so back to this here, because I'm running out of time here. U.S.-Iran tensions from the hostage crisis to sanctions to drone strikes. Also, it's important to keep in mind, the only thing that separates the quote-unquote Middle East from Africa is the Suez Canal. And the Suez Canal was completed right around 1859. It's man-made, okay? All that was part of Africa also. In 1953, U.S. and British intelligence agencies collaborated to organize a coup to remove Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The secular Mossadegh had sought to nationalize the Iranian oil industry, which had previously been controlled by Great Britain. So this is the same Great Britain that now 100 years ago, Great Britain, 1/5 of the world population 100 years ago was under British rule. They were colonies of Great Britain. This is the same Great Britain that colonized Kenya, colonized Nigeria. You want to talk about some African history? We talking about the same Great Britain. U.S. officials, meanwhile, had feared Mossadegh might turn to the Soviet Union for aid. In 2013, the CIA released documents that publicly admitted its involvement in the 1953 coup. The coup, which reinstated the monarchy under the Western-friendly Shah, eventually fueled a surge of nationalism which culminated in the 1979 Iranian Revolution. U.S. sanctions against Iran began when a group of Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran on November 4, 1979, taking more than 60 United States citizens hostage and sparking an international crisis. The 444-day-long hostage crisis, a little more than a year, 444-day-long hostage crisis hobbled Jimmy Carter's presidency, ushered in a new political era for Iran, and helped skyrocket Ayatollah Khomeini, a revolutionary cleric who objected to United States interference and this projected him to international significance. Okay, it also created a state of permanent deadlock between the U.S. and Iran, a tense standoff characterized by a pattern of sanctions over direct negotiations. President Jimmy Carter swiftly imposed sanctions on Iran after the hostage crisis began, cutting off sales of Iranian oil and freezing Iranian assets. These measures did nothing to help along diplomatic negotiations for the release of the prisoners. So on April 7, 1980, 212 days after the crisis began, President Jimmy Carter announced even more drastic measures. The U.S. cut off diplomatic relations with Iran, imposed economic sanctions, including cutting off food aid, closed Iranian institutions within the U.S., and embargoed all imports from Iran. President Jimmy Carter at the time said, "I am committed to the safe return of the hostages. The steps that I have ordered today are those that are necessary now. Other action may become necessary if these steps do not produce the prompt release of the hostages." Okay, so you can check out the rest of this article here at history.com, the official website of the History Channel. We know the hostages were eventually released. And all this is coming back into play today with Donald Trump talking about increasing sanctions on Iran. All right, so earlier in the week, I posted an article from shadowindact.com, and I read some other articles dealing with this new movie that's coming to Netflix about Madam C.J. Walker. It's called Self-Made. and it's inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. Okay, it's a 4-part series. It's a project it called Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker. It will debut on March 20th, 2020. It stars Octavia Spencer as Madam C.J. Walker, the trailblazing African-American hair care entrepreneur who has America's first female, who was America's first female self-made millionaire, according to them. Now, here's the problem with that. If you have studied Madam C.J. Walker, and I deal with her in my lecture series, Great African Women in History, The Mothers of Civilization. Sarah Breedlove was Madam C.J. Walker's real name. Sarah Breedlove in 1905 was a washerwoman from St. Louis. She was hired by a woman named Annie Turnbull Malone, T-U-R-N-B-O. Annie Turnbull Malone was the one who really created the black hair care industry, and she taught the industry to Sarah Breedlove. Sarah Breedlove is then going to become Madam C.J. Walker. So most likely, from all accounts, and I've done a lot of research on Annie Turnbull Malone, most likely it was Annie Turnbull Malone who was the first self-made African-American female millionaire, okay, or first self-made female millionaire, period, okay. Annie Turnbull Malone does not get a lot of the credit because she lost some of her fortune in a divorce, and then she had tax issues, things like this, okay. But when you study this, it was Annie Turnbull Malone who taught Sarah Breedlove the black hair care industry, okay. But this doesn't take anything away from the accomplishments of Madam C.J. Walker. This is just understanding the history, right? So this 4-part series is based upon it's inspired by the book On Her Ground, The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker, written by Madam C.J. Walker's great-great-granddaughter, Alelia Bundles, B-U-N-D-L-E-S. The Netflix original series brings the uplifting story of this cultural icon to the screen for the first time. Against all odds, Madam C.J. Walker overcame post-slavery racial and gender biases, personal betrayals, and business rivalries to build a groundbreaking brand that revolutionized black hair care as she simultaneously fought for social change. Because she was an activist as well. Okay, she got involved in the anti-lynching campaign. She helped fight for a federal anti-lynching bill that we did not get then. We know that it passed the Senate with the help of Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Cory Booker, and surprisingly, Senator Tim Scott, Black Tea Party Republican out of South Carolina. I'm not sure if Trump has signed it into law yet. I have to check on that. Okay. Now, this 4-part series also stars Blair Underwood as Madam C.J. Walker's husband, C.J. Walker, Tiffany Haddish, comedian Tiffany Haddish, as her daughter, Lilia Bundles, Carmen Ejogo as Walker's business rival, Addie Monroe, Garrett Morris as Walker's father-in-law, Kevin Carroll. Okay, so check out more about this at shadowandact.com. All right, some of these topics we'll do through the week because we got tied up and we got callers. But the Columbus Dispatch.com had a very interesting article. Black Eyed Peas reach deep into African American tradition. This is from December 24, 2019. And this deals with why African Americans eat black eyed peas on New Year's Day. So it talks about how eating black eyed peas on New Year's Day has been done by black Americans to ensure good luck in the incoming year, said food historian Jessica B. Harris, who fondly recalled attending the lively New Year's Day party Maya Angelou held at her home in Harlem, New York, where the peas were served. She said, quote, the tradition carries over from the black American community into the general southern community in many places and persists in the North as well as a result of the Great Migration. Okay, 1910, 1970, 1915, 1970, about 6 million African Americans migrate from the South up north. Now, black eyed peas were domesticated in West Africa and carried to the South and the Caribbean in the era of slavery. Food historian Jessica B. Harris said, dried legumes were looked down on as a poor man's food by the economic scarcities of the Civil War, severely impacted but the economic scarcities of the Civil War severely impacted the diets of both enslaved Africans and white Southerners. And when you watch Roots, the later episodes of Roots, you see after the Civil War, you had that white family, George and his wife come. They're destitute. One of the things that the Freedmen's Bureau was doing, the Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands, one of the things they were doing, not just giving aid to the formerly enslaved Africans or the black freedmen, but also destitute white people as well. Now, black-eyed peas became more common, and it is said people considered themselves fortunate to eat them during a time rife with food insecurity. Though Bailey's family uses ham hocks in its black-eyed peas, she opts for a vegan approach to that produces a clean, pure pea flavor, PEA. It also allows her version to be enjoyed by those who don't eat meat. Okay, so check this out. Then National Geographic also had a really good article, nationalgeographic.com. 5 African foods you thought were American. 5 African foods you thought were American. They talk about cola nuts, which come from West Africa, okra, which comes from West Africa as well, watermelon, okay, it comes from Africa. Now the region is unknown. The ancestor of the watermelon we know today first grew in Africa, but, quote, its prototype was originally a bitter melon that was grown on arid, ARID, savannas for its edible seeds and as a storable form of moisture, end quote. Black-eyed peas slash cowpeas, we know from Central and Southern Africa, and then also coffee Arabica coming from Ethiopia. How are we on time? Okay. All right. Many people associate coffee with South America, but, quote, Ethiopia is the birthplace of the world's premier coffee, end quote. Legend has it that a goat herder named Kalbi, Kalbi, discovered it when his herd became particularly boisterous after eating berries from a tree. Okay, so whether that is true or not, how to take a coffee bean, know when and how to roast it, and turn it into a delicious beverage involved a deep cultural knowledge system of growing and brewing varieties from the Ethiopian highlands where it originated. Okay, so check out this article from nationalgeographic.com. 5 African foods you thought were American. Okay, and then the story about the Kwanzaa Crawl that from blackenterprise.com. We'll deal with that next week. Annual Kwanzaa Crawl brings $250,000 to black businesses in New York City. I'll do a special broadcast throughout the week dealing with this. Okay, hey, if you like this type of information, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD lectures are there. You can support the African History Network. Articles that I write are there as well. Donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, or through Cash App, $TheAHNShow. And you can also email us at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com if you need me to send you the links. You can also email us to find out how you can advertise with the African History Network as well. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now, it's corrects wrong behaviors. Not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.